Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for your patience as we've been kind of working through some of the technology challenges. Thank you for joining us for our panel discussion this afternoon, which is being co-hosted by the Town of Newcastle and the Chappaqua Millwood Chamber of Commerce, titled Coronavirus Stimulus Package Simplified. So during this time of deep uncertainty, the Town of Newcastle wants to reassure all of our small business owners in our community that we are here to support you. We're here to be a resource for you, to be an advocate for you to the extent that we're able to do so. We all know that a lot of the guidance is changing. New programs are being announced, funding is approved, then it's depleted, then it's reapproved. And we're hearing about new volunteer-led county and state programs that are being created to provide technical assistance for small business owners to be able to access the funds that are available. It does feel at times like the ground beneath our feet is constantly shifting. And we know it's going to continue to shift. So we're not going to pretend that we have all of the answers, but we really want everyone to take away the message that we are here to help. The governor actually in his daily briefings has begun to talk about this idea of build it back better, by which he means that rather than sort of looking to return to what we used to do yesterday and the way it was before, how can we sort of leverage the opportunity of the pandemic, as it were, to think about new ways of working and providing services that are even better than before. It's something we've been talking about within town government. And it's an exciting challenge, absolutely. And also one that's going to be an imperative for all of us, because no matter what industry we're in, we know that there will be deep and lasting impacts as a result of COVID-19. But that said, before we're able to rise to the challenge of build it back better, we know that we need to figure out today how to stay solvent. And small businesses in particular are challenged simply to keep the lights on and to keep their staff on payroll. And we recognize that there really need to be sort of parallel tracks here. So we're talking about planning for the future on the one hand, but we're also talking about just simply triaging the trauma that we're experiencing today. And again, we're here to help. Small businesses are the backbone of our community. They're really what comprise the majority of space in our business districts. And we also know that they represent the blood, sweat, and tears of many of our residents who poured themselves into their businesses. So to that end, we've created this seminar today, Coronavirus Stimulus Package Simplified, to try to demystify some of the programs that are being offered by the Small Business Administration, as well as the technical assistance avenues that are available to help small businesses with these applications. We have assembled a panel of experts today who can answer your questions and help our local small business owners navigate the economic assistance programs that are being offered in response to COVID-19. First, I'm just going to briefly go through and introduce each of our panelists. We're joined by Pat Keegan, who's the district director from the office of Congresswoman Nita Lowey. Pat has been a good friend to many of us on the call today, having served as Congresswoman Lowey's district director for almost 26 years. Pat leads what she calls, and I'm going to quote her here, a great team that handles constituent services and community outreach. Previously, Pat served as communications director for the New York State Education Department, and before that as the education editor for what was then the Gannett Westchester newspapers. Also from Congresswoman Lowey's office, we're joined by Valerie Benedette, also from the Congresswoman Lowey's office. Valerie is a district representative for Congresswoman Lowey, and her responsibilities include helping veterans and members of our military access VA services. She also provides constituent services and expertise with regard to housing issues. Since the beginning of the COVID crisis, Valerie's been working with small business owners and others with regard to issues accessing SBA loans. We're joined by Mike Weinberg, who's here representing New York State Senator Pete Parkham. Mike is an independent business owner in the fields of insurance and finance, having been in those fields for 35 plus years. He's also a lifelong Westchester resident and also a Newcastle resident, having lived here for the past 12 years. Michael serves as the special advisor to State Senator Pete Harcum, and is also a member of the Chappaqua-Millwood Chamber of Commerce Board. We have Joe Orlando with us, who is the Chief of Staff for the Office of New York State Assemblyman David Buchwald. Joe has worked in the Assemblyman's office for several years and is also a good friend to many of us here in Newcastle. Joe has been the Assemblyman's Chief of Staff since January of this year, and he's on board today to be able to answer any questions and make recommendations to the best of his abilities. We have Westchester County Legislator Vedat Ghashi with us today. Vedat was elected to office in 2019 and is himself a small business owner with a real estate legal practice located in both Yorktown Heights and in the Bronx. Vedat has an impressive bio, and I'm not going to try to describe all of his experiences, but I did note in reviewing his bio today that Vedat served in his native Kosovo as a part of the US and EU effort to establish the newly formed state of Kosovo, literally creating a nation state from the ashes of war. So that experience just seems really compelling in terms of being able to provide aid and legal assistance to those who are desperately in need during uncertain times. And last, but certainly not least, we have with us Ed Phillips from Keene & Bean. Ed is a litigation partner at Keene & Bean, the firm which has served as the town attorneys for the town of Newcastle since 2014. Ed has a law degree from Fordham University and has been practicing law for 25 years. He represents municipalities and public officials and handles contract and employment disputes, leasing issues, and other matters for mid-sized businesses. Ed has also served as a pro bono mediator in federal court and earlier in his career as a law clerk to a federal district judge in Manhattan. And Ed is actually here today because he's been sort of boning up and becoming an expert on the payroll protection program that was established under the CARES Act. Just to circle back, a word about the format for today. We're going to have a couple of very brief presentations followed by a Q&A session. As Lyle Anderson mentioned at the top of the call, if you have any questions as we go through, if you can type those into your Zoom chat function, I will actually read the questions that we get to our panelists. Alternately, when we get to the Q&A, you can just sort of raise your hand if you're on Zoom, if you're on the app, and we'll be able to unmute your line so you can speak directly to the panelists. And the last thing I want to say before I turn over the floor, or rather go on mute since we're in the Zoom era, is I just want to say a big thank you to our town administrator, Jill Shapiro, for creating and leading this initiative. And thank you as well to our partners at the Chappaqua-Millwood Chamber of Commerce, led by their president, Don Danker-Rosen, who's been a fabulous partner for us in terms of thinking about how the town and the chamber can support our small business community at this time. So with all of that said, I'd like to turn it over to Pat Keegan, who's the district director from the office of Congresswoman Nita Lowey, and Pat's going to provide us with an overview of the legislation that's been passed in Washington.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me, and I apologize for the technical difficulties when we're being so warmly introduced as experts. Certainly you can tell that I am not a technological expert by any means, but I want to thank Supervisor Poole, Town Administrator Shapiro, and the Chamber for co-sponsoring today. I get the easy part, the overview, and then my colleague who was also introduced, Valerie D. Benedette, who's been handling, believe it or not, we have 700 virus-related cases in the last 6 weeks, at least 200 of which are directly from small business owners. And let me say, before I get into the alphabet soup of the 3 or 4 federal programs that are now on tap, I want to assure you that, well, first, Mrs. Lowey is so happy that Town of Newcastle is offering this great program today to small business owners. And of course, she wants to hear, and we'll hear from Valerie and myself, what your concerns and we hope some successes, but the fact that you're on this call probably problems with accessing the federal programs, and we want to hear from you all about that. So I'm not going to talk too much, but when we heard from small business owners last week, and I'm sure many of you have been as frustrated by what you hear and read in the media, particularly about the Paycheck Protection Program. Mrs. Lowy convened a couple of voice calls with small business leaders. We asked Marcia Gordon from Business Council of Westchester and Mike Ramita from the Westchester County Association to convene some groups on the phone for Mrs. Lowy. First to hear from small business owners, and then a group of bankers who have been participating in the PPP, as it's called. And then since the majority of our complaints from small business owners like yourselves had been directed at one particular bank, last Friday, I don't know if any of you have ever seen Congresswoman Lowy angry. Well, that's a mild word for what she said to that one bank on Friday on the phone. So I want to assure you that she's not only as frustrated as you, but trying to take steps to correct and resolve and actually get all of you small business owners the money that the programs are intended to help. So as I said, it's a little bit of an alphabet soup, but the Paycheck Protection Program, as you probably know, was funded by Congress in the first CARE Act that I believe was passed at the very end of March. Fewer than 2 weeks into the program, I believe it was April 16th, the system had distributed all the money. The good news about that, and again, probably those of the small business owners who are on this conference today have not yet received money, but totals as of that first round of funding, so by April 16th, the numbers for New York State are 81,000 small business owners had received money under PPP, and a total of $20.345 billion had been given out to New York State small business owners. That's the good news. But as you heard and read, that those funds were exhausted as of April 16th. Congress went back into session last week and added $350 billion in new money, and that, $310 billion in new money, and that included $60 billion for the lenders with less than $50 billion in assets. Now, we all read and heard those horrible stories about Shake Shack and Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and then more recently in the second round, the LA Lakers, and we're not going to get into who's a Knicks fan or an LA Lakers fan or whatever here, but totally outrageous, and that's the mild words for the criticism. So the PPP, and Valerie again is our expert on that. We'll get into the nitty gritty of your concerns, or we'll certainly give you our email addresses if you want to send more information to Valerie that way rather than on the call. There was a window for those small lenders yesterday because, again, you read reports that SBA started accepting new applications from the bank as of this past Monday at 10:30. And then we and probably most of you were reading reports that within 10 minutes, again, the SBA website crashed. SBA's defense is no, they were turning the valve down to regulate or control how many applications from different lenders were accepted within that first day. But as we saw, somehow the LA Lakers got their application through their bank in. So what they started to do yesterday, I guess yesterday was Wednesday, was have an 8-hour stretch of dedicated to those smaller banks to submit their applications. So all of that you've probably been reading about also. We're going to keep following it, of course. Your main contact, as you know, with this PPP program is your bank. It's the banks that submit your applications to SBA. And again, we don't think all that new money has already been committed, but many of you understandably may not know the status. If your bank has not gotten any kind of acknowledgement that yes, those applications went through, again, let Valerie know, and she'll give you her email address after this presentation. But that's in a nutshell, and it's still not a satisfactory program and not doing what the intent that Congress first put in for it. But yes, the goal is to help small business owners like yourselves to help. Many of you also may have applied for what's known as the Economic Impact or Injury Disaster Loans, EIDL. Congress last week also added more money for that program, another $50 billion. But guess what? Here we go again. The SBA website says that as of April 15th, the SBA had stopped accepting new EIDL applications. They report that there are currently 6 million applications that have been submitted with an estimated loan value of $400 billion. So again, until Congress appropriates even more money, we hope your applications are already submitted and are being held by SBA. But again, we will be happy to take your information. If you have confirmation numbers from SBA, that's a great way for us to be able to at least try to get a little bit more information from that. I hate to give you more assignments, but probably all of you are very familiar already with the SBA website and how to try to track your applications for that. The third program from Congress that has yet to really be formalized or finalized is called the Main Street Lending Program. What we have is preliminary information. It will offer 4-year loans to companies, and this is for bigger companies, with up to 10,000 workers or with revenues of less than $2.5 billion. Principal and interest payments will be deferred for a year, and the minimum loan will be $1 million. So that may be way above what any of you are on this call for, but again, and nor has this program been finalized. But I do know that Mrs. Lowy was on the phone yesterday with some other members of Congress directly to Secretary, and I can never pronounce his name, as Valerie knows. Valerie, help me, Minchin, Secretary Minchin, from Treasury, to ask him the status of that, as well as to say, come on, everyone in Washington, this can't keep working in such an ineffective way. Those are the 3 programs, and Valerie, and I know I've probably gone over my time limit. Valerie, anything that we should add before? And I assume Ivy and Jill, you'd like all the presentations and then questions, or how did you want to run the program?
Yeah, I think that's how we'll do it. I've been having some folks type in some questions already I can see over chat, but since I know that we have other presenters who are going to speak to some of these issues, I think we'll just hold them for the end, if that works for you.
Okay.
Pat.
Terrific. Thank you.
Great.
I think it's my turn. I'm Valerie De Benedetti. I'm a district representative. I'm one of several for Congresswoman Lowy. My job is to try to help you with problems that you have with the Small Business Administration or with the PPP loan systems. As Michael Weinberg has commented in the questions, for the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, you go straight to the SBA and they are not taking any more applications. They literally already have more applications than they've got money for already, and like a week ago from April 15th. For the PPP, you go to your bank. Not every bank is doing it. Originally, you had to go to a bank that you had a relationship with, some kind of a relationship, a checking account, a loan. Now you can go to any bank, but not every bank is dealing with people who aren't their customers. You could also go to online lending groups, companies like PayPal, Square, Cabbage. There's a couple of them. but it's, understanding which way that goes is part of what I have to help people understand. I mean, it's a very confusing system because it was put together extremely quickly, and occasionally there have been some issues with, like the fact that very large publicly traded companies got in on small business loans. If you contact me, I can try to help you deal with the system in many cases. I can't always solve your problem, but I can point you in the right direction or give you some advice or explain why things went wrong. As always, I try to at least be a sympathetic ear and tell you exactly, okay, yeah, I understand, I'm hearing this. One of the things we also do is the fact that we collect this information. If one person calls us with a specific problem, that's one thing. 2 times and it's coincidence, 3 times it's a trend, and after that it's a movement. And when it gets to trend and movement, we pay attention. We start collecting it and say, somebody has to fix this. We bring it up to our DC office or even all the way to Mrs. Lowy to say, there's this continuing problem and it's not just one person. So you can reach me at email. It's valerie.debenedetti@mail.house.gov. I'll give my telephone number later on. I think my name is appearing on people's screens. If not, I'll spell it for people, and I won't interrupt this for the spelling of a very long last name right now. So thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Pat and Valerie. And thank you, of course, to Congresswoman Lowy for all of her advocacy and for your work on behalf of our community. I know I speak for everybody on the call when I say sincerely thanks to all 3 of you. Next, I wanted to ask Ed Phillips from Keen and Bean to give us some further information on the research that he's done and the insight he has into the details of the payroll protection program that was established under the CARES Act. Ed?
Thanks, Ivy. And I want to start by thanking you and our town administrator, Jill Shapiro, and the chamber for putting this program together. I'm really pleased to be here. Ivy, at the outset, you said that things seem to be changing from day to day, and they really are with respect to the PPP. When it was rolled out, it came with a lot of questions, and there are still a lot of uncertainties. I don't want to get too granular. I do want to point people to a couple of sources of information that, and there's a lot of information out there, but I think the SBA.gov website is probably your first and best stop. There's also a frequently asked question page that the Treasury Department is updating almost on a daily basis with more specific technical questions. So that's also someplace to look if you've got a question and you can't get an answer. But just by way of overview, and I don't want to get, again, too detailed because there's a lot of information out there, and I think probably a lot of folks who are watching this have already applied for a loan through the PPP program and are waiting either to get the loan accepted by the SBA or just hoping that they get through the portal in time before they run out of money again. So just by way of overview, there are really 3 things that you have to think about when you're looking at this program. How much can I borrow? And there are some categories of expenses that you can borrow for. The biggest one is obviously compensation, paying your employees. That's the whole purpose of the program. There are some limits on that with respect to how much you can pay somebody. There's a cap of $100,000 in annual compensation. You need to essentially prorate that for 8 weeks. And I'll get into the 8-week period in a moment. It's very important. Group health insurance premiums can be paid with the loan, and retirement benefits can be paid. So that you look at those categories, and you can take 2.5 times that amount in terms of what you can borrow. And then you're also able to use the loan proceeds to pay things like your rent, in addition to the payroll expenses that I just talked about. But one of the key things, and the thing that makes the program so valuable, is that there's a component where the loan is forgiven and you don't have to pay it back. But on that, you have to be very careful, because What we've learned through the different regulations that the SBA has promulgated since the program rolled out is that you must spend 75% of your loan proceeds on payroll expenses. Now, what does that mean? Well, you need to do that within this 8-week period. The moment that your loan is funded, the moment that the money hits your account, that 8-week clock starts to run. And you need to ensure that within that 8-week period, you have used at least 75% of the loan to pay payroll expenses. So again, compensation within those limits, group health insurance premiums, because what would happen if you didn't hit 75%? What would happen to the small business owner who says to himself or herself, I'm going to spend half of the loan on payroll and the other half I'm going to use to pay the landlord? Now, you might think that I will just have to accept the fact that only half of my loan is going to be forgiven because I've only used half for payroll expenses. But there's a lot of information out there from lenders who are saying that might not be a safe assumption. And if you don't hit the 75%, none of it may be forgiven. After all, that's the point of the program, right? To put money into the pockets of employees. So that hasn't been clarified yet by the SBA, but I see a lot of information out there raising the question that was raised on a webinar that I watched earlier this week. It's just unknown. So I think if you're lucky enough to have had your loan funded, you need to be sure, and it's going to require some planning, right? Because you have to work within the 8-week period. You're juggling, you know, depending on what kind of business you are, you might not be able to bring all of your employees back if they've been furloughed. So it's a little bit of a juggling act, but the bottom line is if you've borrowed the money, once it hits your account, you have 8 weeks to spend it, and you have to make sure that 75% of that spend is on these qualified payroll expenses, just to ensure that you've protected yourself with respect to the forgiveness aspect of the loan. Until you have an SBA you need a 10-digit SBA authorization number, and that information will come from your lender. And until you have that, you are in the queue with a lot of other people. Your bank may have approved you, but until you've actually gotten through this E-Tran portal and gotten that number from the SBA, you really don't have anything. You're in the queue hoping that you will be reached before the money runs out. So I think that's also important for people to know. But you know, in terms of the spend, if you've had your loan funded, one of the tips that I've seen is create a separate account. Use a separate account to spend down the loan proceeds, again, on these eligible expenses that will get you to the 75% forgiveness number that you're shooting for. Because it's going to be, at the end, it's going to be up to the borrower to document those expenses, and it'll be up to your lender to verify that you've spent them properly. So once you've gotten through the 8 weeks and you've spent those dollars, you will make an application to the SBA to have that portion of your loan forgiven. And then your lender will have a 60-day period to review and approve that application for forgiveness. So record keeping is going to be very important at that point. You want to leave nothing to chance in terms of, again, hitting the 75% on payroll expenses and being able to document that you've done that.
Thank you, Ed. So we have one last presentation before we get to questions, and I do see we have a lot of questions that have rolled in. So I wanted to invite our County Legislator, Vidat Gashi, to speak to us briefly about the assistance programs that have been launched by the county to help small business owners access the programs that we've heard about today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I am happy to present. I don't know where we are on the, I'd asked the Director of Economic Development for the county, Bridget Gibbons, to join. Has she been able to join us? Is she on there?
I can see her in the list of attendees. Ah, and there she is.
There she is. Respectfully, being respectful for all of our time, I think it probably makes a hell of a lot more sense for Bridget to present than myself. So I will yield my presentation time to Bridget.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thanks for joining us, Bridget. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm happy that I happened to be available when Vidot texted me. So, so we have launched. So several weeks ago, when the coronavirus became apparent that it was going to be such a huge issue for our businesses, we launched an economic impact survey, and we collected almost over 700 responses. And the responses to the survey really shaped our response to the crisis for our business community. So the number one concern coming through from the survey was getting money, getting loans to really help them survive with this period when they have no revenue. And the second concern coming through from the survey was they needed help completing the SBA applications. So we we solicited volunteers. We got 400 people that volunteered to help our small businesses complete these applications. So we trained these volunteers, and we built up a program on Volunteer New York, and then we announced it, and small businesses that needed help with the EIDL application, and now with the PPP application, can connect to a trained volunteer on the Volunteer New York website. And it's been a really successful program. We've had hundreds of small businesses take advantage of it. And now my dog is barking at an inconvenient time. So that's been really, really, helpful, I think. And I was just overwhelmed with the generosity of the businesses that wanted to help. I thought I might get 30 or 40 businesses to volunteer to help business owners, and we ended up getting over 400. So it's been tremendous. The third top concern coming from our business survey was people wanted information on how to adjust their business model. And they wanted webinars and information about marketing and just all the stresses they're going through now, emotionally and business wise. And so we are now about to launch a crisis advice program. It's not fully operational yet, but it will be soon. And that consists of, business experts, consultants, and other mentor type people who will be available free of charge to businesses that need advice in this manner. So how do I, should I merge with another business, or should I sell my company, or should I just close, or should I try and, should I take a loan and take on debt and ride it out? Those are the kinds of questions that people are dealing with now. So we are going to put together a whole cohort of mentor type folks that can help answer those questions. And we're also going to be doing a series of webinars based on the feedback that we got in the survey. So a webinar about anxiety and just personal, just the stress that people are under right now, not knowing if their business is going to survive. One about appropriate marketing, how to keep your customers and market in this difficult environment. What's the right messaging now? You don't want to stop marketing. If you think your business is going to make it through, what's the appropriate way to market now and in the coming weeks, and other, cash flow, and other business opportunities. So we really feel like, as we move through this crisis, there's been, first it was really nervous about the money, then it was, applying for the grants. And now as they look to the future and they see that, the governor's talking about testing and contact tracing and, maybe getting back to some sort of normalcy, they're focused on their business. And so the county's, Office of Economic Development, through the support and guidance of our county executive, George Latimer, we are trying to really help the businesses along this whole continuum. And I guess the only other things I would say is we are working closely with all of the business community on a daily basis, the Business Council of Westchester, the Westchester County Association, and all the chambers of commerce. We're really, communicating on a daily basis to really make sure everybody's questions are answered, everybody's concerns, to the extent that we can. We help to, really get information out there so that businesses feel like they, they have a little bit of control. They know they can call me and get a question answered. So we really have been trying to be out in the community and connecting as well as we can. I think that's it, unless there are questions from folks.
Great, that's great, Bridget. Thank you so much. I really appreciate again for you stepping in, and thanks to Vedat for thinking to get you on the line. I think that was really helpful information. We have a lot of questions that have come in over chat and over our Q&A, and I am going to do my best to try to synthesize all of these. But I know, Bridget, you had to jump off, so I noticed one question that came, two questions actually now that have come through specifically for you. The first is with regard to the crisis advice program that you mentioned. When that program is live, when that gets launched, how will folks find out about that information, and what will they do to be able to become a part of that program?
Important information. So all of our announcements of this sort and all the programs that we're launching, we launch it on Facebook. We also have an almost daily newsletter. So if people are interested in learning about these programs, they should sign up for our newsletter by going to westchestercatalyst.com and then scroll to the bottom and sign up for the newsletter. Enter your email address and click sign me up. So that's probably where we send out, that's the most effective way to get information about that. So it's westchestercatalyst.com, scroll to the bottom and sign up. Yeah, I think that's probably the other announcement I wanted to make is if businesses are interested in getting help with their PPP application, they can go to volunteernewyork.org/VVC. So it's Volunteer New York all spelled out, .org/V like Victor, V like Victor, Charlie. And we just today launched a Spanish speaking group of volunteers. So for business owners who really need help, and speak Spanish, we have bilingual volunteers that are trained and ready to go to help them. I don't know how long the money is going to be. I don't know how long they're going to be accepting applications for PPP, but we wanted to try and at least help our Spanish speaking business owners to try and get their applications in. When the crisis advice program is launched, and if there's a website that's, that we're going to implement, we're still figuring out the operation side of it. I'll announce it through our email newsletter and on Facebook.
That's great, thanks. And I'll put in a plug for the Town of Newcastle e-newsletter as well, as Bridget and the county executive teams has been, rolling out this program. We've been providing information through our newsletter. And
yeah, a lot of the towns are picking up what we're sending out and just sharing it. So that's been really, really great.
Great. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. Did anybody have any, before Bridget and Vedat have to jump off, did anybody have any further questions for the county about these programs? Otherwise, I'm going to turn back to some of the questions that we had specific to the PPP and EIDL. Okay. Thank you again. And you're welcome to hang out for the next 10 minutes as we move through these questions. So I got muted. Am I back?
Back.
I sound good? Okay. Sorry about that. So the first thing I see a couple of questions on is with regard to the PPP and how do I apply for the PPP? There's some questions about, how do I figure out how do I apply? If I have to apply through a bank, how do I know which banks I can apply with?
Before that gets answered, can I only say, quickly say that I posted Bridget Gibbons' contact information and the website info in this chat attached here. I'm also going to add my contact info if anybody ever needs to get to me, though getting to Bridget is probably the smarter idea. Thank you, everybody. That's all.
Thanks, Vedat.
Ivy, I can take a crack at that.
Great, thanks, Ed.
So what I've been reading, just anecdotally, is that when surveys are done, folks that have been successful in getting loans by far have worked through a bank or a lender whom they've already had a relationship with. that going to a bank that you're a stranger to, they don't know you. In fact, many banks have indicated that you need to have had a relationship with them as of a certain date. And if you haven't, they won't even take your application.
Mhm.
So I think the best advice right now is if you haven't already done so, reach out to your bank and get moving. It's late in the day to be filing an application, but not too late. Don't give up. And if it's a small bank, all the better, because under the second round of funding and the regulations that are in place now, and even what the SBA has done in terms of throttling down the E-Tran portal and trying to make it easier for the small banks to get in there like they did yesterday. If you've got access to a small lender, by all means, do it. Get your application in.
Can I just add to that? I think they're still both accepting applications. PayPal and Square but I checked this morning, and they both seem to have a place where businesses could apply. I think that those are restricted to sole proprietorships. I don't think you can have employees and be eligible, because they're really trying to target the smallest of small businesses. But they might be worth a shot for, so I would check there as well.
Valerie. Valerie, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Unmute.
Okay, you should
There
hear
you
me
go.
now. I would add to that cabbage, which is spelled with a K. Somebody I have dealt with said they also applied to Axos, AXOS. Now these are fintechs, technical financial companies. These are basically online banks and only exist online. Yeah, I'm sure there might be some fly-by-night ones, but the ones we just mentioned are reputable companies. If they're dealing with the SBA, they probably have some kind of a track record that will work. The SBA won't take applications from just anybody in general. But yeah, these are places that have a reputation behind them.
I also just posted in the chat a group called Pursuit Lending. They're actually being supported by New York State. The controller has added some funds to that, and you can apply through that. And I put the link on the chat.
Great. Thank you all.
Can I add one thing, just because I don't think it's been mentioned yet? It's scams. Unfortunately, this has been a big time for people trying to take advantage of. I think actually on my legislator email, I got something purporting to be checked for direct deposit or request for direct deposit. Yeah. It's going around everywhere. Unfortunately, in addition to all this uncertainty, it requires extra vigilance from all of us, and something we should be mindful and aware of.
So another line of questions that I see for the panel of experts is with regard to the EIDL program, whether that program is still open, whether they're accepting applications at this time. And then also there's a couple of questions with regard to, I've already submitted an application and it went into what feels like a black hole. What do I do now?
The SBA is not accepting any more applications for the EIDL loans at this time. As a matter of fact, since April 15th. But if you got your application in before then, they're looking at it. I have talked to our contact at the SBA. Unfortunately, right now it's taking weeks for the SBA to just deal with all of these applications that they've got. They're actually, if you go to the website on the very first page, they're asking people to apply for temporary jobs to help them through this. Right now, if you've gotten your application already in, good luck to you. You've already passed that hurdle. If you haven't right now, until they get further funding, I don't think they're going to be accepting any applications for the foreseeable future right now. They got far more applications than they've got money for, and they're going to be working through the applications as they arrived. Beyond that, I don't have anything else that I could tell you about that. I mean, we can't push anybody to the head of the pile. We can't, nagging the SBA to help one specific constituent is not something that we could do. We can sometimes get information if you have the application number, if you've got a confirmation. I see there was one question from somebody who said they never got a confirmation from the SBA. And that, I hate to say so, that may mean that they never got the application. The SBA's website did crash a couple of times.
Can I just add, if the applicant did get a loan number from the SBA and that loan number starts with a 3, that means they're in the queue to get funded and they just need to be patient. Loan numbers other than beginning with 3, I don't think, they haven't said anything about that. But if you do have one with a 3, you're in the queue.
That's great. That's super helpful. Thank you very much. Ed, we have a couple of questions. You spoke to this, but I know that there's others on the call who could probably answer as well. But with regard to the Paycheck Protection Program and the requirement for the percentage that needs to be spent on payroll purposes, 2 questions about that. The first was whether that percentage, that 75%, needed to be for the same employees who were on payroll prior to receipt of that loan or not, and whether you could provide any clarity about that. And another question that's come in is whether 100% of that loan could be used for payroll purposes.
And the answers are no and yes. So you can hire a new employee or employees in order to reach, but at the end of the 8-week period, by June 30th, you need to have the same number of employees. And it's a little technical in terms of how you look at the baseline. But there are two things that you have to remember. One is you cannot reduce compensation by more than 25%. And if you do, it's going to start to work against you in terms of the forgivability of your spend. And the other is you have to have the same number of employees. They don't have to be the same employees. So if you have some folks who can't or didn't come back and you want to replace those employees for purposes of spending your PPP loan, you can do that. And the other question was, can I spend more than 75%? I think the answer is yes, you can. There's no, that's a floor, not a ceiling.
So thank you. Before I move on, Valerie, did you have anything to add or clarify on that point?
Not at all.
Okay, great, thanks. There's actually a couple questions. I'm sorry if I'm circling back and forth, but I'm reading between the chats and the Q&As, and so this is a little disjointed in terms of my questions, but you'll all bear with me. Thanks. So there's a couple of questions with regard to having submitted a PPP application direct to a bank. And then not having heard anything with regard to that confirmation that it was received by the SBA. Is there a process by which one is meant to be notified once you've applied through your bank that the application has been received by the SBA and where you are and what your status is with regard to its approval?
In my experience, the banks really aren't communicating that back. It's basically we've submitted your application and then, oh yeah, we got the money for you, kind of thing. I have not heard a lot of communication from the clients I've spoken to and the constituents we've spoken to saying they've heard much. But each individual bank, really, it's up to them. Remember, these are bank loans being supported by the federal government. They're not SBA directed loans. A loan is coming from a bank.
That's my experience too. Once the bank has received all your paperwork and approved it, and you're hoping to get through this E-Tran portal, there's not a lot of information that the bank is going to be capable of providing, other than you're in line with a lot of other people. You know, one interesting stat that I saw was that this portal that the SBA has, it typically would process about 65,000 applications for other types of small business loans a year. So when the second round of PPP funding went live on Monday, there were 1.7 million applications in the pipeline waiting to get through. So just, you can just imagine the type of technical issues that they're having, everyone's experiencing. It's no surprise that there have been massive delays.
So I see another question that's come through here with regard to employees filing for unemployment. And I'm just going to read this question rather than trying to summarize it. It says, I have employees starting to file for unemployment. And this is a whole new process for this small business owner. On the form that the state sent, they said it would be possible for me that the possible cost to me for the employee is $3,300. Would these costs fall under the payroll monies, and could we use the PPP money to pay these unemployment fees? So I guess the question is, can PPP loan funds be used to pay unemployment?
I don't have an answer, but I know where I would look. First stop would be the that frequently asked question page that I mentioned earlier. It's if you Google frequently asked questions, U.S. Treasury, it will come up. It's updated almost daily, and that is where you can find reliable and fairly technical answers to questions like that.
We have another question that's come through just now. I received an email from WorldPay, which is my processor, that they are processing PPP applications. However, they asked for proof of payroll, and my partner and I are sole proprietors. We want to use the loan to pay health benefits. Can I still submit?
Sole proprietors are eligible for loans. So I'd say, dig out the information and provide it.
Ivy?
Yes.
If I can jump in and make a comment about something that hasn't been asked yet. As we get closer to reopening, the governor's made a big point that each individual business is going to need to come up with a new plan, a new normal. That I'm not sure if it's going to be physically submitted to someone or not, but he indicated that it would. So businesses should start thinking about how they want to rearrange their workspaces, their retail stores, their flow to be able to reopen at some point in the future. You're going to have to submit a plan for a new normal. And you should start thinking about that now and how you want to do that, whether it's putting up plexiglass or changing the direction of how people walk through the store or changing the workstations around, whatever it is. He wants people to think out of the box, think about this to limit contact between all of us. And it's more than just wearing a mask and a pair of glasses.
So that's great. I see that we're a little bit past 2 o'clock now. I know there are still questions and that we did not get a chance to answer everything. Jill, I think we're going to be able to share contact information for all of our panelists who are with us today. So hopefully everyone can see this information. These are the folks who are on the call today, and their email addresses and phone numbers. And what we can also try to do is to create a little summary for folks of what we heard here today and some of the information that got shared in our chat feature, so that we don't lose any of that valuable insight as well. Okay, well, so, again, I want to thank all of the panelists who were able to join us today. This format is always difficult, and trying to summarize some of these very detailed questions were a bit challenging for me, but we got some really good questions and we got some really good responses. Gosh, I feel like I learned a ton today. So thank you, Pat and Valerie from Congresswoman Lowy's office for being able to join us. Thanks to Mike Weinberg from State Senator Harkin's office and Joe Orlando from our New York State Assemblyman David Buchwald's office, to Vidot Gashi, our county legislator, and to Bridget Gibbons, who's a part of County Executive George Latimer's team as our director of the Department of Economic Development, and to Ed Phillips, who is our town attorney and a partner at Keenan Bean. So I just really appreciate everybody's time. And we will do our best to get some information out to everybody so we don't lose any of this great information that's been shared. And if there's an interest in continuing to have these kinds of programs, the town is, amenable to continuing these conversations going forward so that we can share as the ground beneath our feet continues to shift and as additional programs and funding and technical assistance is offered up, that we share that information out with everybody. So again, thank you to everybody who participated this afternoon, and please don't hesitate to be in touch if you have additional questions.